Welcome back, everybody. I opened up and asked me anything on Instagram, and this week was a little bit different. You guys brought me a lot of questions about men and my thoughts around that kind of stuff, especially as I work with more women. Speaking of which, my background is cognitive neuroscience. I'm training in IFS psychotherapy, and I work with women every day to help them understand men a little bit more effectively, navigate heartbreak and modern dating. So this week, we're going to go deep on your questions about relationships with men, and I'm giving some ideas, some thoughts, and some approaches on these conversations and mindsets and perspectives, beliefs, all sorts of stuff. And we have the right co-host with us, CJ, because she has
Hello, everybody.
all sorts of thoughts about this too. So welcome, CJ.
Yeah, well, this is something that we have conversations with about all the time. So, I mean, this is just a great opportunity to ask y'all your thoughts and then kind of share ours with you and where we're at with this, especially being in the dating space, because, oh man, it's rough out there. And we get that.
Yeah, 100%. So these are some of the most common questions I get and perspectives I hear out and about as well. So we definitely need to chat about this.
We have a lot to get through. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to be asking the questions. Let's start with one that I think will kind of lead into the others and set the tone. Why do you think that there are so many emotionally immature grown-up men in society today?
Starting out hot. It's interesting, which this may be slightly uncomfortable, but maybe also relieving at the same time, that we don't actually really have data on this. We do not have good data that men as a group have suddenly become more emotionally immature than they used to be. So when you look at research, that we just don't have that data. We do have, over the last couple of decades, really, our expectations for relationships have gone up, which that's not a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. Most people today don't want just a partner though, right? They really want a best friend, a co-parent, a co-therapist, a trauma-informed lover, someone who can read their nervous system, all these different things that we want from our partners and stuff, which is great and is amazing. However, we're kind of grading men on a little bit more of an advanced emotional exam now, if you will, which again is not bad, but we are grading them on a different exam than previous generations. And so something that I see is that guys are still trained. Oftentimes, boys are being trained on an old textbook. Man up, don't feel, fix yourself. But they're being graded on a new exam. At the same time, societally, there's a lot more awareness around therapy language, therapy culture, podcasts where we're breaking these things down, all these different types of therapies and trauma, like our lexicon and the therapy talk, not TOK, but TALK, has increased as well. So the first observation I have about this is that we don't really know that men are more immature now than they were, but the emotional standard is much higher, and the gap between training and expectation and our awareness around these things is higher as well. Maybe we stop and talk about that for a second. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually like that because this is something I've been, like hearing a lot about, especially on TikTok and kind of feminist spaces. And a current theory that's kind of popular out there is that it seems that way, but this is like a method of evolution working. Now we really, really want more, emotionally available partners, and women are the ones that obviously kind of control that and control what the next generation is going to look like. And so like they're hyper aware of these things moving forward and being like, I don't want a partner like that. I don't want a partnership like my parents had or my grandparents had. Like, I see how that worked out. I see how that affected me. That's not what we're going to do.
Yeah, no, 100%. That awareness increasing, I think, is a huge indicator and a huge reason why it feels this way and looks this way. The analogy that I kind of think about is like, imagine you're in a room and you only have a candlelight to kind of see and navigate around the dark room. And you see maybe there's like a little bit of laundry on the ground or a piece of trash or something. And then all of a sudden now there's a floodlight in that room and you can see everything. All of the stuff was still there in the dark, right? But now there's a giant floodlight that everything becomes super and hyper aware. And so that is kind of what it feels like. And I don't think that's a bad thing. As far as data on, is it more or worse now than it was previously? We just don't have a ton of data around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to look at men specifically. I mean, something that we do know is as time progresses, even though obviously it doesn't feel with it like it because there's this social media piece and we just have to see so much more, the world is getting progressively more empathetic. We are able to measure that in statistics, and that's a great thing. I think it's, of course, though, we're looking at it hypercritically now.
Well, and this is another really, really interesting thing in relation to research around emotional maturity. What really the next question that comes to my mind is like, well, are men or women, or is one of those groups more or less emotionally mature statistically than the other? And it's actually more of a complicated question than you would like think when you look at it experimentally. Because if the experiment is measuring emotional vocabulary, journaling, talking about feelings, and articulating your inner world, women score as higher in emotional maturity. If the measurement is more about doing hard things, doing things even when you don't want them, and more masculine, or again, we hate these terms on this show, but more like what men are socialized to come up with, and being able to regulate themselves emotionally. Men score higher on emotional maturity. So it's interesting that what you're testing for and how you define emotional maturity changes what we're looking at. And so a lot of the times when I hear people come to me and they're in my DMs and things like that, I'm asking them, and I just ask a couple questions. I'm like, okay, well, help me understand what you mean by emotional maturity. And almost always, I hate the word always, a lot of the times, they're coming at me with their expectations for how a woman would be emotionally mature, not how necessarily a man would be emotionally mature. And there's a different measurement of, like, they have this expectation they should act and behave like a man or a woman, the perfect woman, as opposed to maybe they are and could be emotionally mature if the measuring stick was different. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think my thoughts on that are maybe that we shouldn't measure them differently, because if this is a question that's recurring and recurring and recurring, it really, really feels like the movement then is that emotional maturity needs to be defined by, again, we hate this, but like those more feminine traits. I don't think they should be feminine traits, but we try to be careful about how that has to do with how you're socialized, not how you are. But like empathy, emotional regulation, communication skills. And so I think that maybe that's where that's going in the lexicon.
I think we miss out on a lot there, though, because the more feminine coded, the way they use it in like research is feminine coded, masculine coded. That's just the words that they use in research or whatever, is restraining yourselves, doing the right thing anyways, problem solving, staying in hard situations without shutting down, quiet responsibility, like honor. And I don't think those are qualities we want to extinct.
I don't know. I mean, I would have to look at more research on this. And of course, like if we have anything, we can plug it down below. But I do think that women buckle in on a lot of those things and probably just don't get as much credit for it, which is also something to look at when we're defining this. Because I mean, we associate, maybe the traditional housewife, for example, with submissiveness. But of course, they're buckling in and doing things that they don't want to do. It's hard to take care of a bunch of children. It's hard to manage a house, put food on the table all the time. So I don't know. I think that's interesting. And I mean, back to my previous point, just on this in general, like maybe those aren't qualities that we want extinct, but if that's the qualities that women are looking for kind of more broadly now, then that's the choice that they're making, because, women, again, control the future essentially by choosing their partners.
Yeah. Is that not both ways? Is that not men don't get to choose their partners? Like what
I mean, they do, but if we think
what
about,
what do you mean by that?
I mean, as far as like giving birth to the next generation, like literally. And when we're looking at, who is controlling the qualities that the next generation is going to see, that I do think lies more in the hands of women, because I mean, broad scope, I have a degree in women and gender studies, or a minor in it. So that's where this is coming from. But when we look at the 4B movement in South Korea, for example, which is very, very popular, Korean women really, really didn't like the way that they were being treated by Korean men in society. They outnumber men. They are, outpacing them in certain areas and not getting better treatment for it. And so they said, we're not going to have children with men. We're just not going to do it. And so their kindergarten statistics last year were next to nothing. Like they've just decided they're going to wipe out the next generation until things change. And so that's what I mean as far as like having that control.
It's interesting. I'd be curious to see what happens based on that. I mean, if that happened in the United States, do you think there would be a movement of men going to other places or other countries or other areas to find partners and marry them? Do we think that, like, I just wonder what would happen, like, longitudinally in that study?
I think it's difficult,
I mean, that's
but
awesome.
I
Like,
also...
hell yeah, go girl. But like, ultimately, do we want to win that game? Like, is that really a game we want to win? Like, extincting the population? Like there's got to be a better solution, I feel like.
I don't think it's bad. I mean, and like it has led to this movement is spreading, because I believe it's also like ongoing in China and such now, and then the bigger impact is not just to impact men, but to impact the government, which I think has an impact. As far as what this would look like in America, I mean, we already see men going abroad to other countries to find foreign wives. Like that has been an occurrence for a long time with American men who, don't like the direction that American women are headed in. So I think we already see that a little bit. And I mean, I do think because the policies interact like governmental change, that would probably have, a similar impact. Of course, the way that Western men are socialized is also very, very different, because I do think that we have a much bigger social media problem in this country than they do in other countries.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Socialization is another huge part of emotional maturity. What is and isn't emotional maturity and things like that in this conversation as well. I do think that I just feel like it's really interesting. There's got to be a way, because the other thing that this doesn't necessarily square for me is what I see boots in the ground. And anecdotal evidence is not solid evidence necessarily, but it's not as if I have, and again, I just want to I want you to understand that I get my bias here while also also being able to communicate a pattern I see. But the people that reach out to us, which is about 1 million, we have about 1 million followers. We get hundreds of DMs a day, thousands of comments, are not necessarily women that are like, oh, I want to not have kids with these people and like do all of these extreme things. They want to learn how to connect. They want to understand men. They want to understand how to meet in the middle. They want to understand how they can be strong and soft. Like they want, like, those are the desires of, again, the little slice of the population that I'm working with. And that we work with at Mind Brain Body Lab oftentimes. And so these really extreme things that I hear, I mean, extreme to me, but I just am not seeing it in the work that I do necessarily. And so,
I mean, I do think it's worst case scenario, and we're not there yet. In the future, yeah, I can definitely see maybe America heading in that direction. We're not there yet, but I would also point out in the content that we do, because obviously, like, I'm in a lot of it, we are doing it through the lens of emotionally mature people, because we are emotionally mature people. And so we're telling you how to respond to an anxious person or an avoidant person from an emotionally mature perspective. And so, yeah, I think it makes sense that, the people that come to us are like, yeah, of course, I want this.
Yeah. And that's the bias that I was trying to address earlier. I mean, that's right. Without a doubt. I think societally, there's often, and we've named it here, the gold standard is the feminine standard of emotional intelligence and emotional availability. Like if you can name your feelings and talk about them, and that's what we call mature. But if someone regulates quietly, stays up, and they show up, they work hard, but they're not processing out loud, we call that emotionally immature or emotionally unavailable sometimes. And sometimes it is, for sure. Other times we're judging a dog for not being a cat, which is tough from my perspective. The style is different. And so we label it as deficiency as opposed to expanding our definition to include both, whether it's a guy or girl exhibiting those other types of behaviors. Because that's the other thing. I do have guys that reach out and they're like, oh, women are emotionally unavailable today, and they're this and they're this and all this stuff. And so again, using the masculine frame versus feminine frame and trying to keep those in steady, healthy gender, this is man, this is woman type of thing doesn't work, because I see these patterns in men and women. But it's interesting. Like the definition of emotional maturity is hard to pin down, and research reflects that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough first question to answer. I mean, if we're looking at just maybe baseline emotional immaturity, then like I can see how like online definitely influences that. And of course you see the, impacts of online in real life a lot, like this red pill typed content where of course men are not being taught any form of emotional maturity whatsoever, even by different definitions.
Well, that's the last kind of thought that I had on this concept, is that where you look and what you expect really massively shape what you see. That's how your brain works. Like your expectations create your reality. So if the environments that you're in are over representative of certain types of men, like dating apps, nightlife, or like just being in the like professional space, because a lot of times when women come to me, I'm like, okay, well, where are you searching? Where are you looking for this? And those are kind of the big three things that they label. And research suggests that insecure attachments live in those environments. Less emotionally mature people live in those environments more than any other area as well. And so you're not really seeing men in general. You're seeing a really specific pond, and you're saying, oh, all the fish in this pond are toxic and poisonous, but then generalizing that, our brains generalize things because it's easier for us, to the whole ocean, when in reality it's a pond. And social media is one of the most sinister ponds, because we see these things so often, and all these stories about some guy getting dunked on and emotional immaturity and all these things, and we think it doesn't affect our brains, but our brains see that, and it creates familiarity, and it creates in our brain what we believe is the environment, when in reality it is not necessarily the entire environment. 60% en masse, 60 to 70% of humans are securely attached and emotionally available. That's data. And that was from, I think, 30 something thousand plus participants, like over multiple years. So it's like our expectations drive these things a lot. So if you're seeing this, challenging this narrative in your unconscious mind can really be a powerful way to start to understand what's going on. I'm not saying they don't exist. They do, and they're loud, just like CJ said with the red pill stuff. 100% agree with you. And I hate it because I think it is not representative of what men are. And when I go to a coffee shop and talk to guys and my friends and things like that, and again, I'm in my own little bias and I'm creating that expectation for sure. We're just putting these boxes, and I freaking hate it so much. So that's a really powerful, or really important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. So bit of a long-winded answer though, but we can move on. That was a good bit of just one video. I mean, we can talk more about that in the future too, because I'm sure we have a lot to go back and forth on there, just with both of our like experiences and educations and all of that. But with, that sort of like definition in place, follow-up, someone asked, what are some signs of safe, emotionally available men?
Yeah, perfect. There's three things that I personally look for. They create structure, safety, and they have a grounded nervous system. So structure is clarity, direction. They help you feel like you have they know where they're going. They have an idea of like what's going on, and they're able to create structure around things, whether that's planning, whether that's how to emotionally regulate, whether it's how to have arguments, whether that's their vision for the future. Like structure is a really important, in my experience of an emotionally available, healthy man has created structure for himself and is able and willing to create structure for you and inside of the relationship in general. The other piece is safety. And I break that down into a couple different things. So structure is the first one, safety emotionally, physically, and financially, which can be kind of controversial. I do believe that that is important for a guy to be able to create safety emotionally, which is a lot of what we were just talking about in relation to like emotional maturity, like feminine coded emotional maturity and men learning those things. I hope it was not lost in that conversation that I absolutely believe men should be learning those things and absolutely should be able to create that safety for someone and learn those skills. We are not helpless, hapless victims of some socialization in society and patriarchy and all this stuff. Surprise, surprise. We as men can learn lots of stuff. And I do believe being able to create that emotional safety is a learned skill and behavior men can and should learn to create that emotional safety for their partners. And that's huge. And it looks like what we're describing. We were just talking about in relation to being able to listen, talk about what's going on in your inner world, creating safety and groundedness. That's huge, right? Bottom line safety. Physical safety is another one. Generally, a healthy guy will be able to make you feel physically safe. It could be in big ways or little ways. I think that's kind of important. And then financially as well. That doesn't necessarily mean he has to make more money than you. Like it doesn't mean that at all. But being able to, again, it goes kind of back to structure, being able to create structure around those types of things, have direction and clarity around these types of things, and have more of a equal perception around these types of things, I think can be really powerful. And I think that is something that is part of a healthy man. And then in relation to grounded nervous system, really what you're looking for there is he responds instead of reacts. Like, is he able to pause and respond as opposed to shutting down, getting defensive, like deflecting, running away? Like, is he able to ground himself and respond to the situation and help you feel emotionally safe, even under stress? And I think those are really the big three things that I talk about when I'm like working with men, and that I work on myself first and foremost, and I work on with men, and what I would be looking for: structure, safety, and responding instead of reacting.
I think those are great ones. Can you maybe just define structure a little bit more specifically?
Yeah, structure, a super simple example is women talk about this all the time, right? Or a lot of the ones that I talk to do. Instead of just saying, hey, let's go on a date, it's saying, hey, are you free 5:30 on Saturday? Okay, cool. You like tacos? Awesome. Let's go to Casey Taco. It's in the River Market. I'll send you the address. What's your number? And I'll text you Saturday morning to make sure that we know that we're still on, right? All of that is structure for her to then operate within. All of those different things. Handled the time, handled the place, handled the location, handled another additional thing. Hey, I know a lot of women don't feel comfortable on a first date being picked up because they don't want to give away their address. Totally get that. If you're cool with that, I'm happy to come grab you. If not, I'll give you the address. That structure, and allowing them to kind of like choose within that structure, if you will. Same thing can be for finances, is another really, really common one. I was with a partner who made more money than I did. I'm an entrepreneur, so it's not like I'm rolling in the big bucks yet. And she happened to make more money than me, which was never a problem for us because I was comfortable creating structure around something that some people feel insecure around. But this is where they kind of all come together. Right? If you can create emotional safety, and we went on a trip, and the Airbnb was like a higher cash price than I could just pay for all at once, but I was able to do the gas and the food along the trip in smaller increments. And so that was the structure that I suggested and created, and that we then operated within. And instead of having to make them think about all of those different types of things, being able to create that structure and not as like as like a dictator, like just create the initial, here's the frame. Oh, you don't like tacos? Okay. Do you like pizza? Cool. Let's go to Minsky's instead. Oh, you don't like Minsky's? Do you like Thai? Okay, cool. Let's go. And it's like, it's not a dictatorship, but it's just that initial structure that you can then operate in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It sounds like agency is just a really, really big piece of that.
Oh yeah. 100% agree. And not being afraid to like create that structure and then getting butthurt if it's something that they come back on or they're not interested in. Like, it's not a personal affront to me if someone says I don't like tacos. Like, I'm not going to get butthurt and like cry about it. Like I'm going to be, oh, totally, that makes sense. It has nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with your preference. Let's move and groove and like shift. So it doesn't have to be, which goes back to responding instead of reacting, right? And creating emotional safety. Like, they kind of all interact with one another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And that's a pretty good example. So a big piece that you mentioned in here was clarity. So kind of adding on to that previous question, somebody else asked, you've mentioned that asking for clarity doesn't scare the right man away. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, 100%. Like, you can't say the wrong thing to the right person. I'm a firm believer in that. If you're seeking clarity out of scarcity and lack from like an anxious place, it can come off poorly and can be felt. So I just want to name that for sure. But if you're stating your direction and then watching behavior, that's a way better solution. to get the clarity that you're looking for, as opposed to trying to pry it out of someone from a fear-based type of place. And if you are able to state your direction, state what you want, state what you're looking for, state where you want to go, and then watch behavior, you will watch and see clarity. You just have to retrain yourself to be sold on what is, not what could be. Most of the time, you're disappointed by a reality that does not even exist yet. You want the clarity for a reality that doesn't exist, and you're unwilling to accept the clarity you do have, which is they are not behaving or acting in the way that you need or is acceptable to you, or up to the standard or the direction that you're moving in. And so if you are able to state your direction clearly and then watch a guy's behavior, that's the clarity, right? I want to go this way. If he gets defensive, he pulls back, he shuts down, he starts to ghost you. Okay, that's your answer. If he's able to be like, oh my God, I totally get that. Here's where I want to go. Here's where I think we could go on this, and starts to move forward, there's your clarity, right? But these are observed things, and you really have to retrain yourself to be sold on what is and not what could be.
Yeah, I would say for more on that, go over to the Mind Brain Body Lab Instagram and check out our skits on anxious and avoidant attachment. I think we cover a lot of that in there. It happens to be in the anxious or avoidant lens, but it's all centered around clarity. So go check those out.
Hell yeah, I love those little skits. What up? Interrupting our normal programming to announce Mind Brain Body Lab's first sponsor, Apollo Neuro. This tool I have been using for years, and I recommend it to all of my clients. Apollo is the only wearable that trains your nervous system to bounce back from stress naturally without pills. Okay, if you fall asleep fast but wake up at 2 a.m. with your mind racing, like I do sometimes, did last night even, or your wearable like Whoop, Apple Watch, or whatever is telling you that you're stressed without actually helping you, this is for you. Apollo doesn't just track your stress and sleep. It acts and is built on a decade of neuroscience research. It learns your stress patterns, calms your nervous system in real time, and helps you stay asleep using subtle vibrations. Users get up to 60 extra minutes of sleep a night, plus 40% less stress and 25% better focus. Apollo was just featured in Forbes for their vagus nerve science, and they just published a randomized pilot study suggesting it's the first wearable that helps prevent burnout. Mind Brain Body Lab subscribers get $99 off. Just hit the link in the description to grab yours. Let's dive back in.
Now that we've talked about emotional maturity, safety, clarity, after we've talked about what some green flags are, let's talk about this question that we received, which is it a red flag if a seemingly polite man makes sex-adjacent or crude comments in early dating?
Great question. There's a couple things here. This, from my work with men, can be what I call and what Dr. Robert Glover considers leaky sexual energy. So if it is coming out from a place of like leakiness, which it feels forced or it feels weird and awkward, and it just feels like they are reacting as opposed to responding, right, to the sexual perspectives and urges and things like that to try to get somewhere or get something out of you and insinuate things. That to me feels like leaky sexual energy, and that to me could be a red flag. The other side of this is that there is objectively is such a interesting word coming from a brain science perspective, but there are measurements of sexuality, and some people are hypersexual and some people are hyposexual, like sex more and are okay talking about it and are highly sexual versus less sexual, and it's a spectrum. Maybe this is a sexual mismatch. If these sex adjacent and crude comments are something that you guys are ping-ponging back and forth on, and you're okay with it because you both kind of match in that space, okay, probably not a red flag, probably a green flag, right? If, however, you are the type of person that feels uncomfortable with, okay, that's totally cool. And for you, that would be a red flag. And the best thing to do, like we mentioned earlier, would be to define your preference. What is your preference? Is it after a couple of dates that you're okay with a little bit more of some sexual humor and some sexual stuff coming into it, which can be in some sense flirtatious almost as you kind of build on your relationship some? Or is that something that's uncomfortable for you, which is totally cool? Totally get that. Take a moment to define your preference on that though, and how you feel and how you think about that. And then be able to clearly signal and articulate your direction and your boundary. And then again, watch behavior, right? If this guy is getting defensive and minimizing, and it's like, oh, I was just joking around, I was just playing around. It's like, okay, brother, the impact that you had doesn't care about your intention. You impacted this human in a certain way, and you got to take responsibility for that. If you can't do that, it's a red flag. But you only get to that realization if you state your preference, state your direction, state your boundary, and then watch behavior. If his behavior changes, he apologizes, like, oh my God, I had no idea, my bad, I apologize. And then his behavior actually changes, that is a positive sign. Healthy relationships are built on rupture and repair. So I would state that as a very positive sign. Maybe there's some sexual mismatch, who knows, but at least they have the skill of repair, which is a really beautiful positive sign. fine, even if they are saying these sexual adjacent, crude type comments. So it's nuanced, but I think that kind of gets at the heart of the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer on like it just requires some more context because I would say like my partner and I probably make a lot of like crude comments to each other, especially in the beginning, just because that's kind of our sense of humor. I don't think it's particularly a red flag or a green flag. That's just the way that it is. But when it got into like a deeper conversation about like an actual mismatch that we had, it turned out fine. It just required that deeper conversation on, okay, where am I at? Where are you at? Okay, what are we going to do to make this better and move forward? Because we seem to be matched in every other area and it works out. So,
100%.
I mean, it just needs more context. Do you have some advice for maybe setting that conversation up?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I would directly, I guess it really depends on how comfortable you feel with having these types of conversations. One of the first things that I would suggest is make it about a part of you and not about you personally. So really great language like, hey, CJ, a part of me feels kind of a little taken aback or uncomfortable with sexual comments like that too early on. I'm still having a really fun time. I still enjoy having our time together. Would it be cool with you if we limited some of those sexual comments for right now? Is that okay? And make it about a part of you as opposed to it being you. That will make someone a little bit less defensive just en masse. And that's something you can do in the moment or after a date. It could be something, if you want some space between you and that where you're not face to face with them, if that feels uncomfortable, that could be a text too. And again, state the boundary, state the direction, state what's going on, the preference, then watch behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good setup and will definitely help people out. So still in the early dating phase, people are still in the trenches out there. We got this question that asks, men say they want to get more consistent and hang out more, then ghost you. Why?
So this gets into something called impulsive reassurance in relation to in the moment. They genuinely, when they're saying these things, they usually genuinely feel what they're describing in the moment. They do want to hang out more. They do want to do those things, but they haven't really thought through whether or not they can follow through. So they impulsively reassure and they impulsively say what's going on. But then when they think about having to follow through, facing your disappointment feels more unbearable. And so they disappear instead of being able to tolerate the guilt or the awkwardness. This is generally linked to lower emotional self-awareness. So some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, actually, and then short-term thinking, right? And I want to be very clear here. It has nothing to do with your value. I don't know how many times we say that in our content, but this has literally nothing to do with your value at all. Okay. If they have a low distress tolerance, they are often optimistic and connecting seeking when they're regulated. But then they default to avoidance and pull away flight behavior, when their anxiety spikes, right? It's like someone saying, I'm totally going to start going to the gym on Monday. And then they don't go. Them not going is really revealing their follow through issues and has nothing to do with the worth of the gym. That would be the best analogy that I could give here in relation to this situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. I like that analogy a lot. And I mean, I also think probably a piece of this is also relates back to like the where are you finding these people? Where are you talking to these people? Because I mean, I think we've all been on the apps and we know what it's like there and how much more consistent that type of behavior is. That's actually something that Cody mentioned in our last video, which is 10 reasons on like why you keep attracting these like anxious avoidance. So go check that out for sure.
Well, that is another piece of this is that when you are frequent daters and modern dating app culture, research does show that these indirect types of endings like ghosting is more common. And so oftentimes what you're dealing with is more of a habit than anything to do with an evaluation of yourself or your worth. It's just a culturally, air quotes, unacceptable practice. The other thing that sucks about this is it's oftentimes the people who are the most anxious that are most likely to get ghosted, which sucks because they care the most and they want that closeness. And sometimes that bid for closeness can feel overwhelming to more avoidant partners or more insecurely attached partners. And so the people who care the most and try the hardest get hit the hardest by ghosting. And it becomes really easy to conclude that they're too much or I'm not enough. But again, this is not the case. I'm not saying that working on your attachment and working on those that fear-based need to cling on and like crave closeness wouldn't help you. Absolutely would. There's always work to be done. But someone else's behavior in these situations oftentimes is not reflecting on your worth or your enoughness or you being too much.
Someone asked a super sweet question that I think is integral to making a difference in the world. They said, I have a 6-year-old son. How can I nurture healthy masculinity?
I freaking love this question. And I'm going to give the beginning that I answer this in the same way no matter what a parent is asking in relation to their child. Humans learn through observation and reflection more than anything else. Okay, so getting him around other healthy males has got to be a top priority, right? And I know it's easier said than done. Like, I'm not going to say that. And I'm also very clearly not communicating or saying that women alone cannot raise emotionally healthy guys and like emotionally healthy masculinity in their sons. And when boys never see emotionally healthy men up close, they can intellectually understand healthy masculinity without having a felt embodied template for it. There is just a difference. Uncles, mentors, coaches, those types of things really, really matter in relation to the development of these types of things. And that is such a perfect example of how our brains work.
I think maybe just like a piece I would add to that is I think we have maybe this taboo about just talking about it still with children when like, because we think, they don't get it or like their language isn't as developed and stuff. But if they're able to see that and comprehend it, then they absolutely are able to like talk about it. And so, I mean, even if, you see like a negative example of masculinity, being able to say, you saw that. What did you think about that? Why was that wrong? Maybe.
Dude, this is one of the best ways. Like if we bring in some research on this, what you're describing is one of the best ways to do this is breaking those boy coded messages and not allowing them to just sneak through necessarily. Two things on this. IFS, internal family systems, language is really powerful for this as boys learn to navigate their inner world and their emotions, giving them that framework of, a part of you feels this, a part of you feels that, right? That's super powerful as far as their like language. And then when we look at research around man up, boys don't cry, don't be a sissy, that's the friendly version of that term. Those phrases are linked to worse mental health and higher, like riskier behavior in boys. And so when he hears these types of messages, whether it's school or social media or in a movie or whatever, say something like, hey, some people think that boys shouldn't cry. I don't agree. Okay. And in our family, boys and girls get to have feelings. Like is a super simple statement you could articulate as you expose him to multiple models of masculinity, and just don't let those little moments go away, right? There's so many things that you can look at in relation to just exposing him to multiple different models of like what a good man can be: gentle, brave, playful, nurturing, thoughtful. And it can come from multiple different types of people, whether it's a relative, a mentor, a teacher, coaches, whatever, that can show strength and tenderness. Oftentimes in media, you're either getting this evil, demonic, red pill, terrible person, or this completely pushover, wimpy guy. And it's like, dude, guys can be so much more than either of those two things. They can be tender, they can be wholesome, they can be emotionally literate, they can be tough, they can be responsible. And there are examples of that. I know there are, because over 70% of people are securely attached and emotionally present and available. So easier said than done, but that's something that's important. Last thing I'll mention on this: boys are often literally just spoken to less. Like they hear less words that come into them, spoken to less often. They're less comforted, and they're emotionally shortchanged is the word from the paper that I was reading, but the drama, which sets them up for more numbness and detachment later. And so just be aware of that. Okay. If you praise him, include things. Hey, I love how kind you were to your friend. You were really brave to say when you were scared, not just you're strong, you're smart, you're fast, you're big, you're a leader. Like bring in these other types of things and talk to them more, speak to them more would be some of the things that I would suggest overall.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Because I mean, also every time you do that, you're like, whenever we talk about, the way that boys develop, and it's because of socialization. We get into these systems that a lot of the times people just don't like. And socialization isn't just at your home. So every time you talk to them, you're also giving them the language to kind of push back maybe against the things that you don't want to see. Like, if someone is saying like, boys don't cry or whatever, you're giving them the language to say, well, actually, here's what I was taught and why. Even if, it seems like they're little, they'll figure it out or whatever. The language can be very,
100%.
very powerful there.
Giving them those tools. Nothing better, because then they can be a change agent as well, and that's how we turn over the entire culture. So yeah, I love that.
I think that's a positive, great note to wrap up on. All of these questions came from the Mind Brain Body Lab Instagram. So if you want to be a part of the next Ask Me Anything, follow Mind Brain Body Lab, watch for the question boxes. I post them every other Thursday. So
hell yeah. And if you guys found this video helpful, make sure that you like it, you subscribe to the channel, and go submit some questions on Instagram. We want to answer them. So we'd love to talk more about them. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.